genocide in April earlier this year were scandalous. He said if the United States Congress didn't cease troubling him on the matter, which we're obliged to do, he would deport the remaining Armenians, ones who still do live in Turkey, who have come there as workers from the Armenian Republic neighboring. Extraordinary. Imagine any other European leader saying that about a national minority.
He denied that Bashir is a mass murderer.
Well, he
said no Muslim could commit
his
genocide.
relations with Iran are far too sickly and warm, as with China. And it is possible that the Ergenekon trial, this massive show trial that's now being brought nearer to a court in Turkey, is the unmasking of a reactionary military Kemalist plot. There have been plots to overthrow the elected government in Turkey before from that quarter. It's possible that that is so, but it's also possible that it's an occasion to shut down all dissent. And I would not want to say that I was confident. It wasn't the latter. And certainly a man who has openly said, while running for office, that democracy is like getting on a bus or a train. You ride it till you get to where you want to go, and then you get off. Some form of coded reassurance, I suppose, to the more unreconstructed Islamists in his electorate. But I don't like the sound of that either. So for now, I think I mentioned this concept before, since one's always going to regret one outcome, there's no possibility of not having a regret, whichever choice one takes. I think I'd rather regret keeping Turkey out of the European Union than regret having it in, with veto power.
So we're 2 years now into the Obama administration. Has there been any reset with Russia? Do you see any benefits from this policy so far?
The Obama administration prefers to explain its policy towards Putin and his Russia, which is what it is, as a reset. And I would be more impressed if there was a little bit more to show for this. For example, it's said that Russia's become recently a little more cooperative in the matter, say, of the Iranian sanctions. Not very much more. And those gestures of cooperation are more than compensated for on the other side by Russian overtures, directly actually to the Iranian nuclear program and offers to help it, in fact. And I regard that as the crucial test of Russian resetting, if you like. On the arms control agreement, well, that's more the price of it than the policy itself. The arms control agreement, I've seen persuasive argument, might be worth having for its own sake. But if it isn't, it's not worth having for the good behavior that Mr. Putin's displayed so far, either at home or abroad.
Do you still believe in the notion of a nuclear-free world? I mean, this has been articulated by the president as a policy. Do you think that's feasible or desirable?
When the president got his good behavior Nobel Prize, in other words, the prize that you get in the hope you will do something for peace, rather than a whole new concept, an Oscar in the hope that you'll make a decent film one day. Maybe a good idea, actually, better than the rewards for the terrible films that have been reached. One of the soggy and regrettable things he said was he looked forward to a nuclear-free world. At any rate, it's the sort of thing people do say when they go to Stockholm, and I feel sure he did there, and has on other occasions. There are two distinctions to be made here. One is that of, if you like, uninventing the idea of thermonuclear weapons. Some people who talk about nuclear-free world almost seem to wish that that could be done. In fact, seem explicitly to wish that there weren't even nuclear reactors. Bizarre, in common with a lot of green talk, expresses a nostalgia for a pre-industrial, pre-modern society. Agrarian relations were more simple and more warm and human, for which I've no nostalgia at all. But I don't take any stock in any of that, but I think the bullets can be taken out of the gun, and the gun put in a drawer. I mean, we are still in a condition not very far from launch on warning. A war that could break out for no reason, because of a misunderstanding or a panic or even a technical hunch. I find that an appalling way to be living. I can't believe we can't improve on that. And it would be much better, therefore, much superior to say specifically how one could live without the curse and the fear of a nuclear annihilation than to talk in arm-waving terms about that involve just throwing the word nuclear with the word free together in a sentence.
on this question of Russia, do you think that some societies are not suited, or at least for the foreseeable future, to have democracy? Or is this the soft bigotry of low expectations?
Well, again, to revert to my favorite 19th century analyst and journalist and columnist, Karl Marx and his devoted sidekick, Friedrich Engels. I've published essays about both these aspects. When they weren't being brilliant about the future of British India, they were unusually shrewd about the future of the United States, which they thought to be the great country for free labor, untrammeled social mobility, innovation, and many other positively charged things. In contrast to the frightful millennial backwardness and despotism of Russia that seemed almost impervious to human effort. It's the view that many great Russian writers have taken of their culture. I simply don't feel entitled to pronounce on that. But one reason, I haven't been to Russia enough, I've only been there once. I've read a lot of its writers and writing, and I can understand the idea of the pessimistic Russian soul readily enough given their history. I think the reason I'd want to resist it is because it makes something like the current Putin regime seem like the best they can do. Well, that's plainly not the case. I mean, a country in far worse straits materially than Russia could do a great deal better than the regime of personal power, in which, for some reason, there seems to be a law that says it must be true, but anyone who criticizes the regime goes missing or is mutilated or silenced in some form or another, in which there's what I consider to be a very dangerous alliance between Russian nationalism and chauvinism, revived under various pretexts of humiliation that I think are very dubious, and a very dogmatic reactionary Russian Orthodox Church, which has now become the clerical garb in which in all public ceremonies Putinism is draped, very reminiscent, in fact, of pre-1917 Tsarism. And for that reason, to be deplored as a terrible outcome for the Russian people and for people who live within Russia's borders, who are non-Russian, but also for Russia's neighbors, because this expresses a clear nostalgia for days of Russian glory and domination and empire.
Do you think the United States or its allies should make contingent security arrangements with the small countries in Russia's periphery, or is that not worth the trouble, like Georgia or the Baltics?
If I'm asked what responsibility this gives us,
yeah.
the menace of a recrudescent nationalist, expansionist, reactionary Russia, with its periphery, or its near abroad, as it's sometimes called, well, I think certainly in the case of the Baltic republics, were annexed by the Soviet Union as part of the Hitler-Stalin Pact, and finally pried loose from that only in the last days of Gorbachev, and confirmed as independent states very recently. I think that's a clear responsibility on our part to prevent any bullying in that case. And I think that the Poles can certainly claim to be able to look after themselves and look as if they probably can. There's a lot of Russian meddling in the Czech Republic, I was about to say Czechoslovakia, which I don't like the sound of. And then, of course, there's a very outstanding case of Georgia, which keeps describing itself, what its present leadership does, is sort of more Western than we are, more committed to our values than we seem to be. Clearly with the hope that we will take that literally, as David Cameron did during the recent conflict, and sort of fly to Tbilisi and declare for Georgia. I don't know, I'd want to know a lot more about Georgian internal dynamics before I'd commit to that.
Just one question on Afghanistan. Have you lost hope in that? Is that intractable? No.
Again, look, there are countries where we are responsible, whether we wish to be or not, where we've incurred responsibility. And there are countries where we haven't. And I think that's a good distinction to make at the outset. What happened in Rwanda, I believe we could have done more to prevent through the United Nations, but it wasn't a crisis or a misery or a potential catastrophe that we had created. It was our job to do more than we did. We shouldn't have vetoed the Czech resolution at the United Nations that called just for the strengthening of the UN protective force in Kigali. We even opposed that. But as I say, it wasn't something where you had to say to every American, look, whether you know it or not, this is our responsibility. Well, with Afghanistan, you can't say that. Or rather, if you like, you can. I mean, we involved ourselves in the Afghan war against the Soviet Union very deeply. We picked some not very desirable allies at that point, for good reasons of realpolitik, or bad if you want. Then we walked away from the country and let it collapse into civil war and factionalism, and worse, final worst possible combination of both chaos and tyranny, an Islamic Republic. Manages to get the worst of both worlds. Hobbesian state with iron rules. Means we've got more reasons than the Taliban to have to undo this and repay some of what we owe to the Afghan people. And that would be true, I think, even if it was not in our interest. Again, with Iraq, we have an ineffaceable responsibility there. The CIA has boasted in the past of helping Saddam Hussein get to power. I have reason to think that boast is probably partly true. We certainly encouraged Saddam Hussein to attack Iran. We declared ourselves neutral in advance when he said he wanted to have a border dispute with Kuwait. This can't be walked away from. Americans like to say, well, what have we got to do with this place on the other side of the world? Well, this is what we have to do with it. So Afghanistan certainly belongs on that list of countries where we have a responsibility whether we like it or not. There was once a moment in the 1950s in the British Parliament when the British government had said very unwisely that it wanted to hold on to the island of Cyprus, the whole island of Cyprus, as a colony because of its strategic importance and because of the bases that the British Empire had there, which command the approaches to the Suez Canal and to Palestine. And there was a national rebellion against this by the Greek majority, and a large British garrison had to be kept there to keep them down. And Aneurin Bevan, the great socialist orator of the Labour Party left opposition at that time, got up and asked the government at question time, has Her Majesty, I can't do his Welsh voice, has Her Majesty's government considered whether it wants a base in Cyprus or Cyprus as a base? And I'm told that people who saw that could see the expressions change on the face of the government. They realized we don't have to run and own the whole place in order to have a presence there. And within actually a very short time, they'd withdrawn, written a constitution, given Cyprus independence, and the condition for it was that two bases remained permanently under British control. Not perfect, but a huge improvement. Well, we don't have to appoint the government of Afghanistan or be responsible for its writ running. There's never been a government of Afghanistan whose writ has run all across the country. I very much doubt there ever will be one. It certainly won't be with the Karzai regime. But it's entirely possible to make life unbearable for the Taliban if we fight more as guerrillas. For example, if they take over an area, we let them run it for a bit. You know what will happen. Apart from anything else, anyone who can leave will, and in our direction. Make their lives impossible. Fight them with subversive tactics. We, among other things, have a very strong interest in continuing to train a cadre of people, as does every other NATO country, who are used to this kind of fighting in these kind of conditions and be able to conduct it very ruthlessly. Because we're going to need it again, a lot. And I think it's important to keep engaged, and if you like, it sounds heartless, keep blooded, because this war is not going to end until one or the other of us has given up. So to use it as a training ground for the smashing and massacre of jihad, to use it as an example of how Afghans could live, especially their women folk, but also their national minorities and religious minorities like the Hazara, Shia, and others, compared to what is offered to them by the supporters of the caliphate. So make that a permanent example. Which part of Afghanistan would you rather live in? And to interdict and destroy their remoter bases by aerial bombardment. Yes, that's something we have to keep on doing. Look, this is a NATO responsibility, backed up by a series of United Nations resolutions. If the Taliban are allowed to declare victory in Afghanistan, it means what? It means they beat the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the United States and the United Nations in open warfare and can boast about it. Well, that's an outcome that's not thinkable.
What role does economics play?
And we can certainly prevent them from doing that. I doubt even now they could take the cities on their own, let alone hold them. I think that's already probably impossible. There are large tracts of Afghanistan populated by peoples who would never submit to Taliban rule. All we have to do is make sure those people don't lose. And it means the Taliban cannot win.
What role does economics play in this? The British government's, all these austerity measures, are cutting the defense budget, our own